welcome back. Samson Itodo joins us next, Executive Director for YIAGA. Good morning, and thank you for coming on today.
Morning. It's good to be back in this place. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been really. And you're back in a different way.
Yeah.
Different. Good to see you in that time.
Yeah, thank you.
But, you know, just coming back from Liberia's election, the fourth consecutive one after the civil war. So some momentum there they seem to be getting. But here to talk about, yes, we've seen some of the recommendations you want INEC to adopt as a result of that election. But just give us a bird's eye view, some sort of background in terms of what transpired, because we're always looking to see how can we improve our own system here, no matter what happens.
Well, like you said, it's that Liberia's fourth consecutive election. That's a country that has experienced 2 consecutive civil wars. There are very few countries, you know, in the world who go through this experience. And so it was great to see that the election was peaceful to a very large extent. But more importantly, it was an election of many firsts. So first, this is the first time Liberia was going into an election with a biometric voter register. So if you want to compare Liberia and Nigeria, Nigeria is quite ahead when it comes to our use of technology because of our biometric register, despite some of the gaps within the register. So it's the first time. They've always used a manual register, but this time, last year, they conducted a biometric registration. But at the same time, last year, they also conducted a national census. So they had a national census and a biometric registration. You can say they could do that because of the population, because they are just about 5.4 million people compared to Nigeria. But it was also the first election where Liberia was taking full responsibility for the conduct of the election. So what does that mean? First, in previous elections, the United Nations mission in Liberia was responsible for providing security. In terms of funding and logistics, you had the international community. But in this election, the Liberians took it upon themselves. They funded the election. They also provided the security. So the security architecture of the country managed the election. So to a large extent, it was a marked improvement compared to other elections.
I hope I don't break your train of thought, but just to piggyback on that matter. So could that have somewhat given them that kind of stability and trust if the UN had been doing that? So they had no choice to say, okay, look, we just need to follow through with this kind of examples. And if we had that kind of scenario here, handling security, it might have been a lot different what we get.
Well, I don't think so, because as a nationalist, I believe that nations and states should be responsible for their security, because why does a state exist? A state exists in the first place to provide security and deal with welfare or social conditions of people. So I think that states should be responsible for guarding and protecting themselves.
Yeah,
and so
I get that.
Even if you have that in Nigeria, it's no guarantee that you're going to have, you know, a credible, or you have sort of non-partisan management of election security operations.
Okay.
I think what is critical is the fact that the Liberian people came to a point to say, hey, we can do this on our own. Because in 2018, the UN MIL left Liberia. But then there were also issues around the professionalism as well as the integrity of the security agencies to manage the elections, because they thought that, you know, the Liberia National Police and the Army were going to be clearly partisan in managing the security. But to a large extent, we didn't see any of that.
Why did they think that?
Because, of course, you know, the state, the Army and the police are answerable to the president, who is commander-in-chief. And the president was on the ballot. And it's this, you know, experience that we have about security agencies acting in a very partial manner when it comes to elections. And their loyalty isn't to the Constitution, but it's to an individual. And where the individual is a candidate in a party, the tendency is to protect the political interest of that particular incumbent when they are on the ballot, or even the ruling party, and not necessarily the entire state. So you see cases where security agencies have been used by incumbents to clamp down on opposition. They've used security agencies to shrink the civic space. But in the case, quite frankly, in Liberia, even though people had their concerns, and Maupe, you were there, we didn't have cases where security agencies acted in a partial manner, like you will see in other climes, especially in places like Nigeria. There are some cases where we have seen security agencies hijacking and interfering with the electoral process, even though that has drastically reduced. But you see elements of that within our electoral process. But we didn't see that in Liberia. But to come to the point about the management of the elections, and I think that it's not just lessons for INEC or State Independent Electoral Commission, it's lessons for the Nigerian people and the Nigerian state. That this whole value of patriotism and love for country is not a mirage. That you have people who are expressing deep love for their country. And I say this all the time. If you have a political class that loves their country and loves their people, what you see happen within our public governance space wouldn't be the case. Because if you love your country, why would you want to force yourself on the people, even when they reject you? It clearly says that you're not actually going into public office to serve the people, you're going there for another objective.
So would it be right to then say that no matter the changes and amendments that we put in place and bring to bear on election day across board, ultimately it comes down to the people?
Absolutely. In fact, it comes down to the people. First, it comes down to the personal integrity of the people. And we have to, unpack this. Honestly, the current 2022 Electoral Act and the Constitution and INEC guidelines that currently enshrined, if we play by those rules, you would have elections that the outcome will not be questioned. You just have a political culture where politicians think it is impossible to win elections without a rigging plan. Politicians think that in budgeting for elections, you must budget for INEC. You have to compromise the INEC officials. You have to compromise security officials. You have to buy up election observers. There's just all sorts of malfeasance. And it's just the paradigm of our politicians. That they think it is not possible to win an election without a rigging plan.
Were there Nigerian politicians in Liberia too to observe these things?
Well, we had two members of the National Assembly, the Senate Committee Chair on INEC as well as the House Committee Chair on Electoral Matters. Very excellent, brilliant gentlemen, and we did enjoy our time with them, and the perspectives that they brought actually really helped us. And quite frankly, our political class need to learn to play this game by its rules. They need to learn to respect the will of the people and also show love for their country. If you love your country, you would not mobilize thugs to disrupt election or suppress voters. You won't prevent people from coming to exercise their franchise at elections. You won't have political parties that unlawfully substitute candidates. You won't have an electoral system that is structured in a way that it prevents some people from casting their votes. And that's one of the recommendations that we have made. Because the big lesson from Liberia, and it's not just Liberia, is the fact that journalists who are on election duty, election observers, the polling officials, the electoral officials, and security agencies were allowed to vote. If there's one country that values the right to vote, it's a country like Liberia, where they make those provisions. So for presidential elections, these individuals, citizens of the country who are registered, who have a legitimate right, to vote, are able to cast their vote anywhere for presidential elections. But for the legislative elections, you can vote anywhere so long as you're within the county, where you registered. In our own place, Chamberlain and Maupe, I don't know the last time that you voted. Not because you're not registered, but the reality is on election day you can't vote because you are actually on election duty. And if you put the total number of Nigerians, eligible Nigerians who can vote, who are on essential election duty, the figure is somewhere close to 4 million. And where you have elections where the margin of lead between candidates is somewhere between 2 million, 1 million, in some cases even 11,000, that is enough, to actually substantially affect the election. But that's not even the premise. The premise is these are Nigerians, they have a right to vote, and the state cannot deny them their right just because they are performing a national service. The other recommendation was around the ballot papers, the structure of the ballot papers. And it's not peculiar to Liberia. In the last Kenyan election, in the Sierra Leonean election, which these are recent elections, the format of their ballot paper had the logo of the party, the candidate image. In Liberia, they took it a step higher by even adding the image of the vice presidential candidate. And we believe strongly that if you change the format of the ballot paper and include the names, it will improve electoral preferences. It would also reduce, invalid votes. Because for Liberia, they gave, the people the option. You see, there's a philosophy that underpins these kinds of policy. It's a recognition of the state's responsibility to provide alternatives for people to express their choice, because choice is a critical value in democracy. And so you can mark on the logo, you can mark on the image of the candidate of your choice, or mark in the box that is corresponding to the candidate. And we believe strongly that if you change the format of the ballot paper, it would really help within...
If I remember properly, and the chairman was there to observe the Kenyan elections.
Yeah.
When Samson was speaking, I said, Mark, while you were there, I said, I'm in trouble now. Because everything now I'm just going to be bearing witness. But it was quite an experience, and I don't know whether I should be on this side or on that side.
You can be on this side for today.
Samson, I think for me, it was a real privilege to have been a part of the study and observation mission in Liberia. And I found out that even though the delegation was small, it was interesting that YIAGA didn't decide to go as, by itself. It chose to pick people from different sectors. What informed this? Is this a practice for you?
Well, so it is a practice. And the reason is it's a study and observation mission. And when you go to study, you're first, you're inquisitive. Because YIAGA is an inquisitive organization. We love knowledge, we pursue knowledge, and we want to understand certain phenomena within our democratic process on the continent of Africa. And we're not just studying for studying's sake. We're studying because we want to foster reforms that are based on evidence and are based on knowledge. But as a civil society actor, we are not the decision makers. There are people who take decisions for changing our laws. There are people who have powers for electoral policy. And so you have legislators. It goes without saying that you can't have amendments to the Electoral Act without the chair and the committee of INEC in the National Assembly, as well as the House of Reps. And so we selected these two gentlemen who were to be part of the mission, because we believe that you cannot be making laws for elections if you are not on the field. And often when we come from the field and we engage with legislators, sometimes they think they have superior knowledge because they are practitioners. Yes, they do have some knowledge, you have to give it to them, but for those of us who observe and also are involved in the planning and the design of these processes, it's important to engage at that level. And we thought that it was valuable to take them to the field, at least go to a different country and also see how have we fared as a country. Nigeria has actually gone ahead. There's so many things to learn from Nigeria when it comes to elections. Yes, we're the giant of Africa, no doubt, but as a giant, we need to be humble to also learn from smaller countries, and that's why we highlighted that. But we also had other stakeholders, other civil society leaders who were part of the delegation. We also had people from the media, like yourself, and some of the contributions that you brought around the role that the media played. We thought that triggering conversations around this with a diverse group will deepen the quality of our engagement. And it's based on that we brought in this diverse group of people, because we only focus on three things. The first was electoral technology. The second was the election results management process. And then thirdly, we focus on the trends and patterns of citizens' engagement. So those are the three things we focused when we went to Liberia. There are other issues, but we just narrowed down on these issues because they are very relevant for our own context.
I was wondering, since both of you are back, So can we then say that all of this experience stands or subsists because the elections, they've not been called yet? So from what you saw, is it likely that they'll maintain the same temperament up until the end? Because if they're going to go to runoff, won't there be chances that, wait a minute, somebody might be under pressure to tilt something?
Well, so that's why the report says it's a preliminary finding. It's not a conclusive report on the elections because, as you noted, we expect perhaps today, or the Electoral Commission, once it concludes its process, it will announce a runoff because it's clear that the incumbent and the leading opposition party didn't secure, 50+1%. They're somewhere around 43% as of yesterday. So we wait for the Electoral Commission. And so this is not conclusive, but there are some aspects of the process that have been concluded. So things like election day operations, right? The pre-election environment. But they are currently in the tallying process. And to a large extent, the tallying process, have been very successful. There were a few issues here and there, but it wasn't substantial to affect, the overall outcome of the elections. But the transparency, there's a foundation that was established for the transparency of this process. Okay. And it does appear that foundation is quite solid. And this is why every other superstructure that is built on that foundation is actually standing and looks very successful.
For me, I mean, apart from asking about the diversity and is this the first time you've had a diverse group like this observe elections?
Well, this is the first time at this scale. So we were in South Africa in 2014 with a smaller group. But this is the first time we have a high level. This is very high level because you had the chair of the delegation who was a former ambassador and also a former commissioner of political affairs at the Africa Union. You have yourself, you had the senators, we have also development partners who were part of it, and then also leading civil society organizations. So this is pretty much the first sort of high level, very high level delegation that we deployed.
It'll be interesting to see, what the future holds with that and how this, eventually impacts. Because I know that you're looking to not just impact elections in Nigeria, but also in Africa as a whole by sharing, your reports when they eventually come out. But I was going to ask you, because when we come back from Liberia, of course we want to be able to paint and we want to learn only the good lessons from Liberia. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we'll be studying. But are there areas where you saw that, look, I think we've done this one well. We shouldn't go back here. Where are some of the areas that you think that Liberians might be needing to catch up with Nigerians?
I think there are a couple of places. The first one is the use of technology. Technology does have its issues, its vulnerabilities and challenges, but I think they can learn a lot on how we have used technology with our electoral process. We've seen cases where clearly they had the biometric register, but the accreditation process was manual. So you come with your voter's card, and then they check the register, and then your name is ticked. We believe that process, because it also slowed the process, was quite slow. If you introduce, a technological device to bridge that gap, I think it would help. And we believe that Liberia is incrementally using technology because a voter's card looks like our PVC, although it had a QR code where you scan and then it takes you to the voters register that is accessible online. So we believe that they will introduce that subsequent. Actually, they would have, but due to budget cuts and then also the timing, they didn't deploy any device. So that's one aspect they can also learn, from Nigeria. The second, bit and something they can learn from Nigeria is to note that, yes, geographically, Nigeria has a larger population, has a large geographical space compared to Liberia. But we feel, and this is again our respective view and something they can learn, it's about the public engagement and those regular engagement with stakeholders, because INEC has weekly engagement with stakeholders, quarterly engagement. They can structure that to update the stakeholders on its plans, because the Electoral Commission had some issues with communication. It's not like the INEC is any better when it comes to communication. But at least with the stakeholder engagement that INEC has, which is regular on a quarterly basis, they can also have that to update, members of the public and stakeholders about their plans for elections. I think one thing they can also learn from Nigeria, it's about, citizens mobilization. They did very well because there's long-term investment. But when it comes to using social media to reach young people, I thought that they could have done better with the use of social media.
Well, Mr. Itoro, if you can hear me, just 1 second.
For the election.
Yeah.
But there are also a lot of lessons to also learn from Liberia. When you look at the results transmission.
Well, Mr. Itoro, just one quick thing, if you don't mind me.
So you move from the polling place.
Mr. Itoro, just one moment. Sincere apologies for butting in. And I'm actually very excited about the fact that you mentioned, citizen engagement is something that I believe that if we can do that well enough. You spoke to the political class the other time, and I sincerely agree with you. Malcolm should have been on your side speaking about the coverage of the elections, in Liberia. But there's something that I saw, and you may want to confirm it, about the style of government or style of democracy that Liberia is using. Is it the same kind of democracy we're having? Or because I think I saw somewhere talking about some kind of additional governance structure or style to their own democracy. Add that to what Malkwe told us about the length of years an elected official can stand, can remain in office in Liberia.
Well, interesting. I'm actually smiling because we had an interesting discussion, and these are internal discussions we had as a delegation about the tenure of office for legislators. And she was right that, legislators serve a 9-year term. But in terms of the structure of governance compared to Nigeria, there's some fundamental differences. Yes, it's a presidential system. You have a president who is the head of government. You have one sort of national legislature or parliament. You have an upper house and a lower house. Now, so that's at the national level, and perhaps the only parliament, that exists within the context. Unlike Nigeria, where you have a bicameral legislature at the federal level and then a unicameral legislature at the state level. In Liberia's case, you don't have that structure at that level. And so citizens vote for the president, they vote for the senators, as well as the members of the House of Representatives who serve, a 9-year term, and then the president serves a 6-year term of office. In our climate, it's 4 years for the executive, and we have 4 years every elections, 4 years of 2 terms. There's a 6 years of 2 terms, which is pretty much 12 years, and that also impacts on the conduct of the elections and also the levels for the transmission or collation of results. Because you move from the polling place, which the equivalent is a polling unit in Nigeria, and then you go straight to the magisterial office, and there are about 19 magisterial offices in Liberia, and then it goes to the national. And to also note that one of the things that Liberians can learn from Nigeria is that at the final level of collation, because once collation or tallying is concluded at the magisterial office, then it goes to the national. At the national level, which is our own equivalent of the ICC, where INEC tallies the final results, you have party agents, you have observers. But at the final level, in Liberia, you don't have polling agents, you don't have observers at that final level.
So how does that impact?
That's something they can learn from Nigeria.
Just, Mr. Todo, how does that impact on the conduct generally? Is there a lesson in that for Nigeria? I mean, I'm talking about the structure of government. How significantly would you say that affects the rancor-freeness or the lack of litigation in or otherwise in Liberia compared to Nigeria?
First, there are three things. One, it could impact decision-making. It could impact the cost of governance. It could also impact, leadership. And so let's deal with the first one about decision-making. You need to note that the population in Liberia is quite small. Liberia is just like, in fact, it's even to a large extent, okay, yeah, maybe like a state, because in the FCT, we are told we're over 5 million or about 6 million people. And so, like, that's one country. Because Liberia has about 5.4 million people. You can't compare governance in a small country like Liberia than governing a country with over 200 million people, 36 states of the Federation and the FCT. It is quite a cumbersome task. So in terms of decision-making, you can have accelerated decision-making in Liberia compared to a place like Nigeria. The second bit is about the cost of governance. We're spending so much, spending public resources just to govern. You have the proliferation of different agencies at different levels. Governors are appointing hundreds of aides and even thousands. You have over 49 ministers in the federal cabinet. You have governors appointing, special advisors. And so the cost of governance for us is very high compared to Liberia. But if there's one thing we can learn, from Liberia in terms of the structure of governance, is that level of transparency and public participation. And we think that it's some unique thing that Nigeria can adopt.
Well, I'll leave the last question to much later, because several people would always keep asking us, when you come back from this kind of mission, I haven't seen there and here, is there hope? But look, thank you for coming.
There's hope,
Samson. So there you go.
Even if you don't ask, there is hope.
All right. So let's look at some messages that has come through now. Some of them. This one is from Dixon. He is concerned about this conditional cash transfer. So it's a pretty long one. Wait for it. He says, I commend President Tinubu for launching the conditional cash transfer through the SGF yesterday. But this might just be another waste of so much money on a project that may not help our economy. 15 million households receiving 25,000 naira per month amounts to 375 billion naira per month. For 3 months, that will be 1.125 trillion naira to be spent on unidentifiable households in Nigeria. If this is the reason for the subsidy removal, then we've missed it, because even the few families that may benefit will prefer subsidy. We don't have data in this country, so who are the poorest of the poor? Some politicians may have up to 20 families on the list. We saw too much waste of money on this same project last year, and we don't expect a continuation of it. A massive single-digit loan facility for SMEs and making the refineries work will rather done the magic, he says. The money is too much to be wasted on the so-called conditional cash transfer.
Well, you cannot ignore his point of view. But look at this one, Olagunju Oladele. He says the drama surrounding this administration's political appointment does nothing to solve the needs of the masses right now. Political appointments, especially when the recipients have questionable character, will also lead to chaos and poor governance. I'll also quickly take Asolo Alpha Cross. It says there should be a separate court to handle pre-election related matters to ease traffic in the courts and not frustrate operations of the electoral umpire. I think there's one more.
Yeah, but of course, as you can see, we are completely out of time. Festus Akimboyewa, we got your message, and we'll probably take it some other time. That's the show this morning. Thank you for the privilege of being a part of your morning. And Maokwe, again, welcome back. We will interview you one of these days. Amaya Makine, have a wonderful day.
Always here. Thank you. I'm Maokwe Ogunyusuf. Goodbye.
We'll see you tomorrow. I'm trained on yourself. Goodbye.